Welcome to 12 Minutes or Less with the Author. I'm your host, T.L. Brown, but you can call me Tracy. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Today I'm joined by Neil Bullock, author of the Primordials series, and we're going to talk about his latest book, Nexus. Neil is a fan of fantasy, science fiction, and magic realism, which he tends to combine into his somewhat speculative sci-fi novels. He enjoys the kind of mind-bending stories told by Blake Crouch, N.K. Jemisin, Peter Clines, and Jeff Vandermeer, among others. He loves putting normal people in weird situations and seeing how they cope. Welcome, Neil. You know I'm a fan, and I am thrilled that you had time to talk to us today.
Hello, nice to be here.
Awesome. Well, you know what? I want to get right to it because I want to talk about your book, Nexus. I read Nexus, just finished it last week. 5 stars all the way. I loved it. It's the third book in your series, and I can't recommend the series enough. But Nexus, I thought, wow, he's raised the bar yet again. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's get right to those questions. Uh, for our readers and listeners, can you tell us about your new novel, Nexus, book 3 in the Primordial series, and what can readers expect?
I think what people can expect is probably somewhat unexpected. That tends to be kind of a larger theme in my work. Specifically, what you can expect is a group of people who live aboard a spacefaring train, um, flying around the galaxy and learning about things and solving problems as they go. Basically, the problems kind of vary in scope from fairly small things to catastrophic planet destroying things. The goal of the third one, Nexus, from my perspective, was to raise the stakes, as you say. But it was also, I've kind of had three questions in mind since I started writing this series. I won't necessarily, and I don't think I'm going to spell them out because I think there are probably spoilers there, but certainly the second book answered one of the questions and asked another one. I think if anyone's read it, you probably know what that is. And Nexus was always the plan to answer the remaining ones, which you told me before we started was a little bit of a surprise to you, and that's kind of good. That's what I was going for. That kind of surprising. Yes, we know there's more coming, but this is surprisingly detailed, and there's a lot here. So the plan for the series is 9 books split into 3 trilogies with a kind of a time gap between. So this is the end of the first trilogy, essentially, is how I'm thinking of it. And the aim was basically to round it out, so to speak, to make it kind of complete, but also to set up the next trilogy and the rest of the series. And the reason I chose the name Nexus for this one, aside from being a physical place in the book, is because it's kind of the nexus of stories to some extent. It kind of sets up the rest of the trilogy, but it also sets up at least one side story that I can think of off the top of my head. There's possibly 2 in there. Can't remember how the editing went now. But yeah, there's definitely one side story that's probably going to be a trilogy that will stand alone, but will also link in. And I've kind of got a few plans in that area as well. So lots of offshoots of the main 9-book story.
And you're kind of already answering my next question, which is great. how has that storyline evolved from the first book? Can you just tell us a little bit more about that? Because when we start with Off Track, book one, we meet Eden, and we start with normal everyday life, and then an event happens, and then you go from there. So, and where we are with Nexus right now, I mean, this is a radically different life for Eden and others.
So, I mean, Eden was the only viewpoint character in the first book, and it has moved on a little bit from there. There are now two, and I think in the fourth book there will be three. I'm trying not to assault people with too many viewpoints, because it's one of my least favorite things where you jump from like one or two characters to like, I think the worst example I can think of is it jumps from 4 to 19.
Oh,
I didn't enjoy that. um, Try and keep it limited. Um, but the first book was all. I kind of think of it as being a bit driven by adrenaline and panic, um, and as a result, you don't really get to know that much about the characters. They do kind of pause, slow down a little bit, and talk about themselves to some extent, but there's not that much. And book three, it gives them a lot more introspective time, which is always kind of what I've wanted to get to. It's it's interesting to kind of take it in the character study direction to some extent, um, and look at people's backstory in detail. I still haven't gone with detail as I want to, and there's kind of a lot of Megan, who is one of the new viewpoint, one of the new characters in Nexus. Um, there's kind of quite a lot of her backstory in there, and I already know where I'm intending to take that in the future. So that's kind of been probably the main area where everything has evolved, and how detailed I am in looking at the characters now that they've had time to kind of get used to their lives and settle down a little bit.
hmm.
There's still a lot of panic and
Oh, yes.
adrenaline in book three, but it is also a lot longer, so that they just have kind of a bit more room to breathe, so to speak.
Did you have any surprises when you were writing Nexus?
Yes. The main one was that there is now a romantic subplot, which I certainly wasn't planning on having, and the first two don't go anywhere near romance. Um, so that was probably the main surprise for me, and it was actually in conversation with my beta readers, that came about, because people were asking the questions of kind of, will there be any of this in the future? Are you looking at it in that kind of way? And I wasn't. Um, but I think there is. I don't read a lot of romance, and I often don't kind of, I kind of skim over romance in other stories just to a bit of an extent. Um, but also there is, I think, probably a bit of satisfaction in that you just can't get any other way. So yeah, I started thinking of it in those terms, and that was the big surprise for me.
And I once again I don't want to give spoilers away, so I'm gonna speak in code. I just found it to be very rewarding, the direction that you went. I don't read a lot of romance. You know, uh, I think your delivery of relationship building, we'll call it that, was believable, and it was a nice rounding out of the characters in the story. So I think you did a really good job.
Mhm.
Future writing projects, obviously, we've got books 4 through 9. So
Yeah.
um, the next number 4 is going to start a new trilogy within the series. Can you tell us ideas for that? Anything without spoilers?
It- okay, so far we've kind of focused on the main characters, and we've kind of added characters to it. Um, the next trilogy is going to be kind of focused a little bit outside, um, and it will look at kind of getting people across the galaxy to work together. What happens when cultures clash? What happens when people choose personal greed over the greater good? Type things like that. Um, And also, there is a prequel story that I'm working on about how Lara boarded the train originally, as she was actually the first character who is still on the train to board.
I like how you put that. Who is still on the train.
Mhm.
But that's very exciting. Neil, thank you. Thank you so much for making time for us today. I can't wait for the next book to come out.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
Listeners, readers, you can find Neil's books on Amazon, Apple Books, and Kobo. You can visit his website at neilwritesthings.com. You can also find Neil on Instagram at Neil Writes Things. Please give him a follow. Links to his books and Instagram are in the podcast caption below. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you the next time. This has been 12 Minutes or Less with the author.